Hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. I'm happy to see all your faces. I'm happy to see all the interest into this challenge. I'm very excited myself as well. So yeah, let's get started with the AI for Coral Reefs challenge. This is going to be the agenda for today. First, I will start off with a short introduction about ourselves, FruitPunch AI, Reef Support, and one of our partners, Reef. Then Crystle and Marcel from Reef Support will share what their mission is about and something a bit more about their company and also about the data that they will provide for this challenge. Then there's a short Q&A followed by a little bit more for me about the challenge format and goals. I will tell you something more about how the build-up of the challenge is and what you can expect if you will join us, and followed by the last Q&A and the closing. All right, so why are we here today? Well, you've probably already seen something about it in the news, but our coral reefs are dying out. Almost 50% of all the coral reefs that we have over the entire world has already been severely damaged or has already died. So we at FruitPunch AI thought we have to do something about this, and who can we ask to collaborate on us on such a project? And that's how we arrived with Reef Support. They have a very awesome aim to change what is happening today. They will introduce themselves a little bit more in just a few minutes, and I will introduce our other partner, Reef, quickly. Reef is an open source workspace for machine learning. It has a bit, as the founder Camilo Pachman described it works a little bit like GitHub, but it's mainly focused on machine learning, and they will be providing the infrastructure for this challenge and also the processing power. And next to that, Camilo, the founder, who will also give a masterclass on how Reef is used. But firstly, we from FruitPunch AI, what do we do? Well, we're building a platform for AI talent development, because we believe that AI is the most powerful tool that we can use to better the world, and we want to implement AI for good. But how do we do this? We want to build an AI community to solve humanity's greatest challenges. And to do this, we need to educate AI engineers at scale with an ethical and sustainable mindset. So how would you go on such a big challenge? We do this by organizing events and challenges with companies and organizations who want to better the world. So we had previous challenges in the wildlife sector and in the health sector with differing and very good results. We're trying to educate people by doing these challenges and building in that way a global community where people can join and get their hands dirty on real world AI projects and really educate themselves into making the world a better place. So for this challenge, I will be the challenge manager from FruitPunch. If you're going to join us, you will be dealing with me a lot. I will be here for all your questions and for all the support. And for more technical support, we also have Sako Arts. He's the CTO of FruitPunch, and he will also be supporting us as well. So for now, I'd like to give the screen to the CEO of Reef Support, Marcel Kempers. He will be presenting about their company and their goal. And together with him is marine biologist Crystle Wee, who will also give a short introduction about how the data is gathered, and she will tell you a little bit more about the data itself.
Thanks, Dorian, for the nice introduction to FruitPunch and the challenge, a little bit of it. And very nice to have all these enthusiastic students, early working professionals, AI enthusiasts. Really excited about this challenge. It's really for a good cause. And yeah, we hope that we can build something really amazing together. So I'll go ahead and begin the presentation. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about who we are as Reef Support, what we do, what we hope to do through the challenge, and what our ultimate goal is. So we are Reef Support, And we are based in the Netherlands. We started actually early this year together with my co-founder Johan and other various talented individuals. We're located in Noordwijk, if you guys are aware of that area. What we do is we work with data collection, processing of ocean-based data. We also use GIS, so that's remote sensing and satellite data. And we also focus on AI-based projects because we feel that AI could really do a lot of good for the environment. And our focus lies on using citizen science and community-based impact. So a good example is this hackathon right here. And our mission is to accelerate the transition from data to decisions to protect our oceans. So a bit about coral reefs. They cover only 1% of the ocean's floor, but they support over a quarter of our marine biodiversity. So at any point of time, most of our marine life have interacted with coral reefs. And they also support over 1 billion people for coastal protection, for tidal impact, food, and tourism income. So it's very important, not just for the marine life, but also for human life. But very sad news that by 2050, more than 90% of the world's reefs will die. So we're really in a race against time here. And over the last 30 years, we've already lost half of this incredible resources. So you can imagine, yeah, it's a really sad market to be in. But that's why we're here, right? So maybe just a little bit about reef monitoring, how it's being done today, how we understand and study the changing patterns of our reefs. So there are four main types of how we survey reefs. The first type is the quadrant. So it's basically a rectangle and you go one by one through a large area. And you have a transect line. So a diver will basically go along this transect line and study the features along this line. There's also a roving survey. So this is more sort of free diver survey where it's a group of people, group of divers, and it's sort of more of a random survey, I would say. And then there's also the towing boat method. So there's someone being towed by a boat and he's holding a clipboard recording what he sees underwater. So these are the four main types of reef monitoring surveys. Some other types is, so when they record data, instead of pictures, they also record down, they basically count manually each species, how many are detected, what kind of fishes, what kind of coral or sand or rubble is located in the area. And we also have something called a fish census. So this is when a person looks at an area vertically and counts the number of fishes that passes through each second. So this gives you good indication of how healthy the reef is in terms of the marine biodiversity interacting with the reefs. Also a good monitoring handbook is this Coral Reef Health Monitoring Manual book, and we have a copy. So if you're interested, just shoot us a message. Some of the issues faced today by coral reef protection and monitoring, firstly, it's very expensive. So you can imagine it's very difficult and expensive to have a team of divers always survey the reefs, especially in developing countries and limited resources, it's extra hard. To scale up this practice, it's also very difficult because coral reefs are very diverse, heterogeneous, so it's very difficult to collect information in a large enough space and time. And thirdly, it also costs a lot of time, not just for data collection, but for processing. So on average, we see that for a one-day dive, you can dive about for 4 hours. It takes about a week to analyze this data from this collection. Outdated software and coral research. This is sort of the industry standard of how reef researchers like Crystle uses to process coral reef data and to help us understand our reefs. So first and foremost, the photos collected underwater have to be enhanced. This is for color correction, sharpness, brightness, what have you. And then you look at the length, so different kinds of features that you can detect, length, area, diameter. But this software I'm showing is actually called CPCE, so Coral Point Count Cover with Excel extensions. So if you see on the left, each picture that's uploaded into this software, these red dots appear. And so the researcher has to click on each of these red dots to match it with what kind of species, what kind of fish, what kind of coral, what kind of algae is located on that dot. And from there, we get the result. So you can imagine for each of these photos, there are about 25 to 50 clicks, and that can take a lot of time if there are hundreds of photos. So this is where we think AI can play a really big role. So if research is meant to be cutting edge for science, why aren't researchers using cutting edge tools like AI? Again, some problems faced by coral reefs. Firstly, fishing. So fishing, when you have fishing boats dredging through coral reef layers, definitely destroys the reefs, which are really sensitive. Divers, tourists, when they stamp on reefs, that also damages the corals. We have coastal expansion. When we develop things in the coastal areas and offshore, we also pollute the waters a lot, and we release a lot of nutrients into the water. And because algae absorbs nutrients a lot better in corals, the algae grows too much and suffocates the coral reefs also. But the biggest cause of all is because of rising sea surface temperatures, because of climate change. And because of this, the zooxanthellae, the algae that's living on the coral, that's actually an animal, produces too much oxygen, and it becomes toxic for the coral. So the coral releases, let's say, go away algae, and there's no way for the coral to really eat. And it really leaves the coral to be bare, to be bleached by the sun. So that's what we're fighting against as well. Something we do at Reef Support is we see how we can break the sea land barrier, because most of the time, marine researchers like Crystle only look at what's happening in the water. So they study what's happening underwater. But most of things that affect reefs happen on land. So there's coastal expansion, unsustainable aquaculture practices, plastic pollution by humans. So all these things we're trying to link factors, the causes and effects essentially. And this is more for the topic for today. So we're asking ourselves the question, can AI really save our coral reefs? But that's what we're here to figure out together with you guys. Something we're looking at into the future. So these are the main problems I talked about. So excess algae growth, can we detect them early on? Can we detect invasive species? For example, on the top right, you see the crown of thorns, which is an invasive species of coral. So they eat corals all around the world, but it's quite an easy solution. You just transplant them. So you put them in a different location. So you save coral reefs in that region. So early detection is very important. And the last one on the bottom right is for diseases. So you have white band disease, white aquaporite syndrome, different diseases that you can detect early on. In our challenge, we're going to, this is far from the future, but in our challenge, we're going to look at the very basic AI that we can build for reef researchers like Crystle, conservationists, NGOs who transplant and save corals. So there's some data sets available that we have. So this is example of a quadrant survey, the very first method I was talking about. Our first data set comes from Indonesia, from an organization called Indonesia Biru Foundation. Biru means blue. So they're very standardized transect surveys with this. And with this, we can detect live coral cover, essentially, what type of corals they are, whether it's branching, whether it's submissive, soft or hard corals is something that we would like to look at in this challenge. The second data set we have is from the Dutch Caribbean, so the ABC Islands, Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao, very beautiful islands. We have data sets from here, but in the Caribbean waters, it's very sandy, and coral colonies are very sparsely located. So if you see some of the data sets below, how it's described is very similar to CPCE. So the points are linked in the photos to the Excel sheet below. And that's how we sort of know what's there. But with this data set, there's a lot of sand and rubble, which makes it a bit challenging to work with this data set. The last data set we have, however, is worldwide. So the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Ocean mainly. In total, we have about 1.1 million quadrant photos. For this challenge specifically, we want to focus it down to about 11,000 images, which are very cleanly annotated. So it's very user-friendly data to work with. And we can go through about the labels and how it's being processed and used today. But I'm sure in the masterclass that we'll be having in the first or second week when the challenge has started, we'll go more in depth about how these data sets actually work and how they can be used. But just so you know, there are quite a few amounts of pictures that we can already use for this challenge. So for the challenge itself, we're doing 4 main things. So the first is color correction, because this is quite important for standardizing the pictures or the photos that are taken underwater, because they can be blue, green, white, black, dark, very different. And the next one would be object segmentation. So when looking at corals, we just want to identify the object essentially. And then secondly, coral identification. So we're looking firstly, whether it's an algae, whether it's coral, whether it's dead or alive, that's also doable, whether even if it's a coral or not. And then as the challenge progresses, we want to go deeper. Coral species is very difficult to detect because today we know about over 12,000 species of corals, but it's estimated there are about between 1 to 9 million different types of species of corals. So it's very difficult to build an AI for corals, essentially. So we're starting at a very basic step with soft, hard, dead, alive corals, and then we can go perhaps to the genus level, which they're about less than 10 sort of sets instead of species, which they have millions. And lastly, we hope to create a very robust machine learning pipeline through an API so that we can develop it further so that in the future, we hope we can go into species level as well. For now, I would like to introduce one of our members at Reef Support, our very own Dr. Sylvia Earle, our very own marine biologist, Crystle Wee, and I'll give her the floor now. I'll control your screen, Crystle, but just let me know when to switch the screens, yeah?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Marcel. Yeah, I hope everyone has a better sense of like why exactly we need all of your help to develop AI solutions. And yeah, I'll just go into it very briefly about my interaction with the oceans. I've been diving for almost 9 years already, and I've done about maybe 500 dives. Most of these dives are research dives, and they've been largely around Southeast Asia. And just within these 9 years, a short amount of time, I've seen so many reefs being degraded over time, and it can be rather disheartening. I started off like, really young, just volunteering at the aquariums, and then slowly I went into research in my undergraduate, doing some work on coral nurseries and how they support different kinds of invertebrate species. Subsequently, I did my commercial scuba license. And the world of commercial scuba diving and scientific diving is insane because, there's so much specialized information that so few people know. And sometimes it is very difficult to be able to process so much information with so few people and so little expertise. And this is why it's important that multiple people are able to process this kind of information very rapidly. So if you have any questions about coral reefs in general, or the kinds of threats that they face, and especially in terms of diversity and why they're important, please don't hesitate to reach out. So where I come from, I'm from Singapore. And for those of you that know Singapore, it's actually a very urban city. Most of our area is built up, and we've actually lost most of our coastal areas to reclamation. We're just a tiny island about 45 kilometers across. And a lot of our reefs, a lot of our mangroves, our seagrasses, they've basically become inundated and buried by lots of sediment to try to increase the amount of land space in Singapore. And despite all of this, it is incredible to me that there's so much marine life in Singapore. Singapore is incredibly built up, but we have a quarter of the global species of hard corals alone. Lots of different kinds of marine biodiversity. And I think it's just testament to how hardy, in a sense, corals can be when they're given the right conditions to survive. And it's our job to make sure we protect the areas that are the most important, and we prioritize these areas for conservation. And this is why it is important for us to have this kind of data, because there's no use having data if it's not used or it's not useful to conservation at all. So the objective, in some sense, of having all of this information is that it helps us prioritize areas of key concern, areas that are most threatened by all these different factors, and it provides conservationists, governments, NGOs, and all these other organizations like Reef Support with ways and means to tell people a story of like where reefs are, where they're the most in need of help, and what we can hopefully do to safeguard these, our natural heritage. So part of my journey was working in the Maldives, where I was there for about a year. And the Maldives, most people think of it as this like super idyllic tourist destination. You can go and you can see sharks and dolphins and whale sharks. Basically everything you can think of, you can find in the Maldives. And I was completely stunned when I went there in 2017. and I found that most of the reef was actually damaged. So what happened in 2016 was that there was a massive bleaching event that happened, and a lot of the major reefs in the Maldives were completely decimated. So we're talking like coral cover going from 90% down to something like 7%. So it was an insane amount of coral that was just lost very rapidly within this short period of time. And as climate change, keeps going on and is exacerbated, these bleaching events triggered by high sea temperatures, as Marcel mentioned earlier on, they're going to happen more frequently and with a higher severity. And that's why it's so important that we are able to find out information about reef monitoring, which are the areas that are most susceptible to bleaching, and also to even develop things like coral nurseries, where we can help to propagate coral and fragment them so that they're able to restore areas that are degraded. So this picture over here shows a coral nursery. Each of the fragments start off less than 10 centimeters. And this particular type of coral, these branching corals, they grow very rapidly. And even though you fragment a small portion, within a few months, they can grow very large and you can transplant them back onto the reef. You can basically, reef forest in a sense, or re-reef a reef. And this is why it's important for us to think about how we can, automate data collection for reef monitoring or coral nurseries and transplantation work. So these are other applications that AI can have in terms of marine biology. I want to show this short clip that I took in Singapore of a very, very amazing event that happened in Singapore. This is a phenomenon known as coral spawning. And all these pink dots that you see, they're actually egg and sperm bundles from corals that are released usually only once a year. And this only happens at a very specific time under very specific conditions, after a full moon, when the temperatures are just right. And this is particularly amazing because this is the only way that corals are able to sexually reproduce. However, because this event takes place at such a precise moment in time, it is very difficult to capture so much information at one go. The reef spawning everywhere, and it's called a synchronous spawning event. It's happening simultaneously. So how do we begin to even estimate how many egg and sperm bundles are being released? Where do these bundles go? And which are the reefs that are producing the most amounts of these viable gametes, or basically the next generation of coral larvae? Corals can reproduce asexually, but when they reproduce asexually, such as by fragmentation, this has certain limitations in terms of their resilience in the ecosystem. So for example, if a coral is a clone, multiple clones might be affected by the same disease. They might have the same threshold for different kinds of threats, like sea temperature increases. So by having more sexual reproduction and being able to generate more reefs through sexual reproduction, this enhances the resilience of a lot of key ecosystems within coral reefs and within the ocean in general. And yeah, like these are some examples of the kind of wildlife that you can see depending directly on coral reefs in Singapore. Oh yes, and we have turtles in Singapore. We have hawksbill turtles that also hide in coral reefs, and these are critically endangered species, meaning that if nothing is done to conserve them, they could very well go extinct. This is where AI comes in again. How can we predict and model the amount of coral larvae produced during spawning events? Where is the larvae likely to be transported to? And which areas are critical to conserve as important coral larvae sources? Also, another lesson from Singapore is coral bleaching again, because this is a phenomenon that doesn't only happen in the Maldives. It doesn't only happen in the Great Barrier Reef. This is happening worldwide. And we don't fully understand the extent of bleaching events because they happen in spikes of sea temperature changes. So depending on the currents, depending on the hydrodynamics, certain areas are usually more at risk than others. So when you see a coral turning white like that, it doesn't necessarily mean that the coral's dead. It means that the coral is under a period of intense stress. But given the right conditions, these corals can recover. The zooxanthellae that Marcel talked about earlier on, the algae, it can return to the coral. So it's important that we're able to track the recovery as well as, the extent of bleaching. So how can we collect spatial data on coral bleaching from satellite imagery? How can we estimate the severity of bleaching just from photographs, in terms of the color changes, in terms of the scale, and the percentage of a coral colony? So there's so much information out there, and it's not being fully utilized. I also worked briefly in Indonesia, where I saw a lot of coastal communities that depend directly and they interact with the coral reefs on a daily basis. And these are the people who actually, even though they're the most closely interacting with coral reefs, they have the least information at their fingertips. So this is also something that I am particularly interested in. How can we make this kind of information, spatial data, accessible to rural communities or coastal communities? And these days, everyone in these coastal communities, they have a smartphone. So it's not that they have no technology. They have access to technology, but they don't know that it's available and they don't know how to use it. And is there even technology available for them to understand, where aquaculture farms should be set up, which areas should be conserved, which areas are key critical habitats and nurseries for different fish species, for example? So how can we make this information and technology accessible to rural communities as well? So there are lots of different questions. Basically, we're starting off with just, the basics of like percentage cover. And I think photo quadrats, as Marcel has mentioned earlier on, this is a very easy way to take a snapshot of the reef, process that information, and if we're able to synthesize this information very quickly, then you won't need me anymore. I think that's the point. We don't want more of me. We want a lot less effort in terms of learning how to identify coral species, and more people out there actually taking action and making a difference. Because ultimately, all of this data, it's a means to an end. Oh, that's very nice of you, Buster. But yeah, like you get what I'm saying. This is why all of your work is so important, and I'm just here at your disposal, really. So yeah, and I think we have a few last slides to wrap up our main aims and goals for Reef Support, and of course this challenge. Marcel, would you like to conclude, or should I?
Sure. Thank you very much, Crystle. It's always very nice hearing your stories all around the world. Very similar problems, but also very diverse. Each specific location have their own sort of intrinsic needs, and also ones based on the people and the communities that are there. For example, the rural communities, the people here, they probably survive a lot on fishes. So that means coral reefs are very important also for not just their income, but also for them to literally eat. So we can see technology and data can be very useful for people today already. And Crystle will never not need you. You are very important to us. But yeah, the goal is definitely to share your knowledge to people that don't study marine biology for 5 years and that they can do something about our oceans. So that's definitely a really good goal, Crystle. Thank you very much for sharing. Yeah, I think we have just about 2 slides to wrap up. This is our hope mainly for the challenge and through Reef Support. To have a future where we can utilize AI at its full potential to make the health of oceans better and solve some of the issues we don't know yet exist already. To have conservationists and NGOs all around the world to harness the power of AI to observe ocean dynamics, changing patterns of reefs in the hopes of regenerating and protecting it. Through FruitPunch as well, we want to train students, working professionals, early graduates with the knowledge of AI to prepare them to deploy its power to save the world. I think this is our last slide, actually. Well, thank you very much for your attention today. We're very much looking forward to working with every single one of you. If you have any questions about anything at all, my email's right there on the left and Crystle's email's there on the right. And yeah, this is it, and looking forward to meeting all of you. And we're here to stay for a little bit to answer any of your questions.
Thank you very much, Marcel and Crystle. It's great to hear all these personal stories. It really helps visualize why we're actually doing this challenge. I think everyone has gotten a great idea of why this is very important not only for the biodiversity, as you said, but also for those 1 billion people who really depend on the tourism income and how do you say that? It's a barrier. Sorry, Marcel, can you repeat that one time? Because I didn't.
Yeah, so I think there are about, let's say, over 500 million people living within 100 kilometers of the shoreline, so the coastlines. And coral reefs actually, also mangroves, absorb a lot of the tidal impacts, let's say with the sea levels. So it stops flooding, it stops damage to property in coastal areas. So coral reefs are definitely very useful for just everyday protection.
I'm curious if there are any questions from the participants. You can speak up right now or put your question in the chat. If not, there will also be a later question round. So I'll just continue now with the challenge format. And then, yeah, if you come up with any questions, don't be shy. We don't bite. And we're here for your help and information. All right. So as Marcel and Crystle already explained, the challenge goals that we have is to develop AI algorithms for color correction, the coral segmentation and identification. And we want to create an API with Pipeline 3 API where marine biologists can just upload their images and within seconds have a great segmentation of whatever corals they have just dived above. But apart from that, and apart from what we can do for the corals, there's also something to win for you guys, because we care a lot about education. And for us, the best way to educate yourself is peer-to-peer learning and in a challenge-based manner. We really believe that the best way to do this is to gather as much AI enthusiasts and from all different walks of life, all different levels, so junior, senior, as Marcel already explained, students, postgraduates, professionals, and have them work together so they can really learn from each other. Apart from that, yeah, it's good to work on real world applications. So for this challenge, for example, computer vision is gonna take a big part of this. So if you're interested in that, definitely join this challenge. And domain knowledge is also coming along very well. So if you're really interested in the coral reefs and the ocean part, you should join as well. And at last but not least, we at FruitPunch AI also do the accreditation. So after the challenge, you will receive a certificate of completion if you carried along nicely. So if you participated well, then you will get a nice certificate which will highlight your skills in which you excel during the challenge. These are based on peer reviews, so your challenge teammates will not rank you, but like give you a score on how well you're, for example, perform on programming, on computer vision, or for example, more soft skills like presenting, communicating, all those kinds of stuff. And eventually these skills will be highlighted on our platform, which is currently still in development, but in the end will be available. So keep an eye on that as well. So the challenge will take about 2 months. We will start off at the 4th of October with a team of around 25 to 50 AI engineers. This depends a little bit on the on how many people apply, but also a little bit on what we finally decide to be the subtasks in this challenge. So you won't work together with 25 to 50 people, but you will work together in a subgroup from around 5 to 8 people to complete your task. And then in the end, after 2 months, all the subgroups will come together and we will deliver a nice product for the Reef Support. And this is combined with a nice final presentation on the 1st of December. But before we get there, in the first 2 weeks of the challenge, we do a lot of research and we organize masterclasses to educate you guys, to give you a head start for this project. The masterclasses that are already been planned is one from Johan Runhaar. He's the CTO of Reef Support and already has a lot of experience in working with this kind of data. So he will be explaining how, more the technical part and the programming part of how to work with this data. And then there's a masterclass from ML Reef, and that was the open source machine learning collaborating platform. And they will teach you guys how to make great use of their processing power. And today we also discussed that there will also be a domain masterclass from a marine biologist. And we haven't completed everything around this yet, but you can make sure that it will be there. Oh yeah, to be sure that I've said it, September 30th is the last day you can apply for this challenge. So that will be the deadline. So make sure if you want to join that you'll be there in time. And who are we looking for? Well, first of all, we're looking for contributors. Contributors can be anyone, junior, media, senior, data scientists, developers, engineers, domain experts, anyone who is interested in joining this challenge and is willing to put at least 8 hours a week into this challenge. Then we need coaches. Coaches are, we need a little bit less coaches than contributors, since coaches will be there just to coach along the way and advise during the weekly meeting. So we just need them to be there about 2 to 4 hours a week. And this role is reserved for more experienced machine learning professionals. And then the last role as a teacher, for people who will be willing to maybe give a masterclass, maybe people are expert in their domain and willing to share their knowledge with a group that is applying AI for good, then you can apply as a teacher. So we'll work fully remote in a scrummish manner. We'll have weekly heartbeat meetings with the coaches and with the people from Reef Support. Then their sub-team will have weekly meetings as well to set track and to discuss progress. All communication will be going through Slack, but later on more about this will be explained once you have applied. And computational power will come from ML Reef. So that's about it. If there are any questions about the format of the challenge, please contact me or ask right now, would be even easier. To what extent can this project be a learning project for people that don't have a lot of experience in machine learning algorithms, but have in other data science techniques? Well, as I said, this project is for junior, media, and senior data scientists. So if you already have some experience with other data science techniques, but don't really have worked with this type of data, which is probably 90% of everyone, because not everyone will come out of uni working with a lot of coral reefs data, I guess. So yeah, if you do have experience as a data scientist and with programming, especially, make sure to contribute. We can use people from all walks of life. We do ask you if you have some experience with Python programming, because we are of course working with computer vision and a lot of machine learning techniques. So programming is kind of essential, but for example, we don't need all coaches to be or teachers to be super good technical professionals. We also need people from domain experts.
Hey, my name is Mark. I'm in Vancouver, BC, or in Canada, so about 8 hours from you. To what extent is the communication or the classes, are they synchronous? That'll change my ability to to make some of these things.
Yeah, I get it. So to make sure everyone can always be a part of this challenge, first of all, every meeting is recorded always. And most of the communication we have with the teams, or the teams have with each other, will be over our Slack channel. So for you and your sub team, it would be beneficial if you're able to arrange a meeting time with them that works out for all of you. But for the weekly heartbeat with us and the coaches and the guys from Reef Support, it's not essential that everyone from every group is there. Also, if we start with a team of like 25 AI engineers and everyone is coming up with their story of their sub-team, we will have very lengthy meetings, so we don't even want that. So that's why every sub-team will be appointed a task manager, and the task manager will have to be there every time the meeting is, and they will present the weekly progress and also the roadblocks they're facing, so we can offer support in that way.
What is a typical team sub-team size? Sort of 3 or 4, or
around 5. Yeah, it differs vastly between challenges. I guess for this challenge, since we have 4 goals what we were working towards, we will probably have 4, 5, or 6 sub teams. Depends a little bit on what types of models we will be training on the first 2 goals of this challenge. Because I can imagine that one sub team will try different model for color correction than the other sub team, so we can play a little bit in the amount of sub teams. So, but you can, I think 5 or 6 people per sub team would be my guess for this challenge.
And how are those teams selected? Are we self-organized, or? So
first of all, everyone gets a gets to give their preference for a subgroup. So before the challenge will start, we will arrange the topics that people can vote for, and then everyone who is applied for the challenge and has been accepted can then give their preference for a topic. And usually this goes very well and everyone gets exactly what they want. But if it's not your first choice, it will be your second, right? The only thing left for me to do here today is thank Marcel and Crystle for the great presentations that they give. And thank everyone who was here today to show their interest into this great challenge. And I hope that I will see you at the kickoff at 4 October.
Thank you very much. And I'm here for any questions, okay? You have my email. Thank you very much.